nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Stephen. All right, and we're going to go to roll call. Lisa.
Thank you. Chair Chapman,
Here?
Mr. Esquaga,
Here.
Councilman Bybee,
Here.
Mr. Edelstein,
Here.
Miss Miller,
Here.
Miss Richard, and Miss Fraza. You have a quorum.
Great, and thank you. I do want to welcome Ms. Miller, and thank you for joining us. We all had a chance at our last meeting to just do a couple of minutes of introduction, so I'd like to give you that same opportunity if you would like to.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be a part of this committee. I'm Geralda Miller, and my love here in Reno and my passion is the arts. I am the executive director for ArtSpot Reno. Care so much about the arts. I'm an arts advocate. I'm on the city's Reno Arts and Culture Commission and on the Public Art Committee. So anything that's arts related, I like to be a part of and know what's happening, and just support our artists and support our arts organizations. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Thanks for joining us. All right, we are going on to item B, comments from the floor. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes. The public is encouraged to comment on all of the agenda items as well as issues not on the agenda. Do we have any public comment, Lisa?
We have two today, the first one being Gina Lopez.
Great.
And I brought visuals. Hello. Last weekend, me and my partners and other artists in town held the very first Battle Axe and Tracks Music Festival. We want to thank you for supporting our efforts this first year. And we set out to make an impact, and that we did. We had over 1,500 participants, audience members, attended the two-day festival with roughly 30% of the attendees from out of the area. We can track over 200 room nights and our hotel partner, The Row. As you can see from the pictures and read from the comments, we were able to curate an excellent lineup of artists and execute a unique Reno experience for all. Our concert goers and bands are raving about the weekend. Our concert attendees are on fire, committed to come back next year, as many avid festival goers called it the best festival they've ever attended. This week, we've sold over 50 tickets for 2023 without even having a lineup. We have built trust because the experience last week in Reno is one they don't want to miss out on again. We accomplished this in showing our special Nevada charm, and we have even adopted a tagline for 2023 adopted by one of our festival goers from Washington, the Biggest Little Music Festival. This is a proven strategy for economic impact, and now Reno has a proven entity. The potential of this event is unlimited. Beginning its 12th year this weekend in Sacramento, the economic boon from the Aftershock Festival is impressive. The festival started as a one-day event in 2012 and has grown since to 4 days full of music, and the overall economic impact is $26 million in 2021. That included more than $1.5 million in hotel and sales tax collected by the city and county, along with their support of 7,000 jobs. The festivals are part of a concerted effort to promote tourism to the tune of $1.5 million approved by the city of Sacramento this year. They are cultivating new festival goers, and as a neighbor, we can benefit and contribute to that effort. We spoke with you about this event in April, and we are grateful for the award that we received in July. But what we've learned is the marketing effort is a year-long effort to create what we want to create for the amount of audience members that we want to create. Our overall goal for Battle Axe and Tracks is 4,000 concert goers. We have created a product and established a base to achieve this number, but we do need continued effort and support over the next 2 years to achieve our goals and allow for BAT to stand on its own after that. Lastly, I encourage you to see for yourselves. Go to our social media pages, look at the comments, look at the pictures. These are unedited and they are not slowing down. People had an amazing time and they can't stop talking about it. This is our home. We're homegrown here in Nevada, and we encourage all of you to look at what's happening now and what's happening here by the people of Reno for special events. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Any other public comment?
Spike McGuire.
Hello, and thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time today.
I'm also here to talk about the Battle Axe and Tracks Music Festival. I'm a full-time musician. I've been a full-time musician for over 10 years now. I do a lot of events here in Reno, as well as a lot of, sorry about that. You would think a professional musician would know how to handle a mic. As I was saying, I've done a lot of events here. I've done a lot of events outside of town. And it's really a special thing that they did. They found a way to not only enhance our community with something it didn't have, but great ways to incorporate our community that is here. I'm born and raised in Reno, Nevada, which is kind of a rare distinction these days. I don't meet a lot of other born at St. Mary's kids. But I've been here my whole life, and I've never seen anything quite like this. It was a true full-scale music festival, and I've done Lightning in a Bottle in California, and I've done Moon Runners Music Festival in Chicago, and it was just so cool to see something of this scale here. And not only did Gina do a stellar job of bringing in some top names like Kenny Wayne Shepherd and Jimmy Vaughn that people were really excited to see, they did an incredible job of honoring our local artists here. There were not only 3 local bands on the bill, and I should say I'm a bit biased because I got to be one of the bands, as well as the MC of the event. But in addition to 3 out of 16, which is a pretty great percentage of locals, she also asked me to put together a guitar battle to open up. Sorry, I should have silenced that. Please don't count points against the festival for my phone. She had me put together a guitar battle, and we had 9 different guitarists come in, and the winner of that battle got to open the festival, which is huge. It's amazing. And I can definitely speak with authority as a full-time musician. It's hard for, local artists to break onto the festival scene, but once you get one festival, then it's a lot easier to get the next festival and the next festival after that. So it's an incredible platform and opportunity for artists here to grow, which is really great. And another thing that was cool, the production company that set up the stages and all of the sound, and the backline, what's called backline, which is there's oftentimes a company that will provide drum kits and a bunch of guitar amps and a bunch of bass amps and all the musical stuff to keep it running seamlessly without too much teardown and setup. Those companies are both based right here in Reno, and they go all over, California and the region doing these incredible events. And I just think it's so great that we already have such a rich entertainment infrastructure here in Reno, and that Gina tapped it in a way to do something that hasn't been done before. And it, like I said, it's all local people. So, I've played all kinds of things they'll get the seed money and they'll make a splash and they'll have a great time, and then as soon as the seed money is gone, kind of their incentive is gone. But I don't think that the incentive will waver for anyone in this crew, because this is our home, and this is what we love to do. And it was just so wonderful to pull everyone together and do it together, and also get the fans. And I'm going to go fast because I only got 10 seconds. I talked to a lot of the VIPs who said they go to all the different blues festivals, and this ranked high among all of them. It was as good as any, and they all came from out of town, so tourism.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire.
I just wanted to say thank you to Gina and the group. This is exactly what we're looking for, these new, fresh events, so thank you.
All right, hearing no other public comment, we are going to close that item, go to item C, approval of the agenda of the October 7th, 2022 Special Events Committee meeting. Are there any changes or updates to the agenda? To staff or from staff? Anybody on the table? All right, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the agenda as submitted by B.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll second it.
Great, all right. All those in favor, do we do a roll call, or just all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. All right, item D, approval of the minutes of the September 9th, 2022 Special Events Committee meeting. Are there any updates or changes to the meeting in your packet? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
There's a second, I just have a couple comments.
Is that a second from you?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser.
Just seeing in the minutes, I didn't see, we had discussion about the NCAA and sports, and I didn't see that referenced in the minutes. I know we talked about off-season, but I don't know if it needs to be, but it just seems like there wasn't a lot in the minutes regarding that discussion. So,
I think we're gonna be bringing that same discussion up today.
okay.
I know that's part of what we will be discussing as we get into the next item. Are you suggesting a modification to the meeting minutes?
I just think we should put that in there. I mean, it was a discussion that we had, I think, the first meeting, and I think I don't want to put words in anyone else's mouth, but it seemed to be important to the board that NCAA and attracting different sports to the region. So it just was a big part of the discussion, and I didn't see it in the minutes, so I don't know if you need to put it in there, but it seems like it would reflect the first meeting, that's all. So,
Because the meeting minutes are not verbatim meeting minutes, is that correct? There's summary.
Yeah, yep, that's correct. But if we want to put a reference in there that discussion occurred, we can. So I would ask the original motion if you'd concur to approve the minutes to be revised post-meeting to reflect that the NCAA discussion took place.
I'll change my motion to include that.
Great.
and there was a point that, and Patricia, I can't remember what it was now, that said something about why our criteria could not allow that event to happen, and I don't recall what it was, but that was important.
It was because, did I push that wrong? It was because the current funding is set up so that the event continues to go.
Right.
And the NCAA events would not have that same kind of continuity over a number of years.
So I just think that was an important part too of the discussion, so. Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, and are you accepting that second?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
Great. All those in favor with the change?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Thank you all. All right, to the meat of today's conversation. Item E, discussion and possible action to recommend the creation of a program to fund new startup events and/or development of a program to attract established events to the area. The RSCVA Special Events Committee is being asked to discuss and possibly approve a recommendation to the RSCVA Board of Directors to create a program to fund new startup events and/or develop a program to attract established events to the area, utilizing additional $5,000 in special events funding contained in the fiscal year 22-23 budget. The Special Events Committee is likewise being asked to discuss and possibly make recommendations regarding the process, criteria, and funding priorities of such program, and/or provide direction to staff regarding the same. So I'm going to just start off with just a quick comment. We are going to discuss the existing special events program at a later item. So I think if we can keep our conversation kind of on this new funding and new opportunities, kind of as an extension on that current program, because we will have conversations about that, you know, kind of similar to the criteria that wouldn't allow the university to do something because it was a one-time event. That's kind of baked into that existing criteria, not this new one. So with that, I'm going to open it up for discussion and start the conversation about where we'd like to go with this item.
Comment.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'd kind of like to hear from Tasha initially, because she's been working on that other bucket of money, and she was here and did our presentation last time, and I read through everything again to kind of refresh my mind. But as we're looking at possible new startups, or how do we establish events, you've been there, I mean, I don't think you guys just open it up and everybody drops on your doorstep with a application. Can you kind of give us a little bit more maybe background and direction on how startups and how that process works that might help us?
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned before, when we do have new events, much like Battle Axe and Tracks, when they come in, right, we work with our community partners to get the word out. So a lot of these events are already planning to take place, and a lot of times they don't know that this funding is available until they talk to the right people. It's there, then we figure it out. To answer your question, my initial suggestion, and I think I maybe mentioned it before, was to get our sales team involved as well. In thinking through new events, especially as we're talking about sporting events, they know they're going out to these established events elsewhere. They're looking to seek to bring them here. How does it work for them where they are now? How could we do it here in Reno Tahoe? So I think that might be something we definitely want to consider during these discussions, since they have experience in that. I haven't been here since we've had a special event basically production program, which we did back in the day. Stephen probably remembers this. So my role has really been just receiving applications. So in a way, yes, they are just knocking on my door, and I have it there, and we talk through it. But that would be, the sales team I think would be a really good resource for this. But other than that, we have had some events come in. I think I mentioned before Emerge, which was like a Life is Beautiful from Las Vegas. They did come to us and say, hey, we're looking to bring this event to Reno Tahoe. So we kind of went around, spoke with the properties, felt things out with them as to where could they even host something like this? You know, what kind of funding would they need? But they came in with their own budget, with their own ideas. And then unfortunately COVID hit. So we didn't get to really see that one through. But that was an example of something we did have come here that we just talked through. So there's so many elements to this. It's a bit out of my expertise from the current program.
So a couple of things that we do when we go out to encourage people to apply that everyone should know about. First of all, we put together a news release promoting the ongoing period where people can apply. This is then elevated by our media relations team that goes out to the local media and asks for help in getting coverage. We turn to the Chamber of Commerce. We ask them to also list that as a reference. We put it on our website. We put it in our newsletters as well. So anywhere that we can reach the community at large, whether it's through traditional media, through our social channels, our website, and through partners such as the Chamber that help us promote, that is how we currently go out and attack and elevate that period when people can apply.
Mr. Chair, yeah, and again, going back to our last meeting, and I think Tasha brought up the discussion on this really, the original $500,000 program that you're in place, you felt was sufficient for the requests that were coming in. And I think for your point, Charles, of how it's posted, it seems to be working well on its own. I think this second bucket was really kind of the opportunity. I think we used the term to kind of go out hunting, right? It is very much a sales, I think there is a sales function here. I think even as an advisory committee, we all wear different hats and different aspects that we're in, you know, from the arts to professional sports to collegiate, you know, and then everything in between. What are we missing? What are those gaps? You know, and I do think, and you know, honestly, 500,000 could probably go very fast, but it could be a great first step in kind of, and I don't know if it's putting it to a working group as a sales function, to start highlighting, you know, not necessarily what is out there to create from scratch, but what is out there. I mean, to me, one of the most obvious, and it's more just maybe where your interests are, is the university. And, you know, to see Kansas football coming in town, and I don't know if it's next year or if it's a couple, but those things that is a citywide event, you know, or honestly, Boise coming in a couple weeks is a citywide event. There's something that's already put in place. And if it meant coming to the table, or at least even being in that discussion where the RSCVA is sitting, I'm not saying we're going to tell the university who to bring, but we may be a resource to say, how do we get a Pac-12 game once every, you know, other year? And again, I'm not hooked on Pac-12, but the reason I say that is it's regional. That's a potential visitor that could come back throughout the year if they're from Berkeley or Pullman, Washington, or Bend, Oregon, or. So again, I don't know if it's taking this effort into kind of a sales discussion and kind of go, where is that low-hanging fruit? I mean, the Life is Beautiful folks, again, if they were coming to us before COVID, I don't know, is there an interest from them? I'm not saying we go and Life is Beautiful, I don't know. That's a massive event, but, you know, again, I go back to, this is such a different feel than your 500,000 that you're servicing the community with. I think this is really going out and trying to be much more kind of the rifle approach on it.
Charles?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. You know, we have a 3-person sports team in our sales department that is going out and hunting all the time. That's part of their job. While we've been very successful with the amateur athletics, part of that is they know what's out there, and whether it's going after Olympic trials or other special events around sports, that is already part of what the sales team is doing in and around sports. I happen to have a great conversation with Ms. Richard and President Sandoval about working closer and trying to pursue those things, which is terrific. Personally, I think what we need to look at is if we're going to really put that effort and resources into hunting, we probably need to identify a person that is in charge of that for new business, because the sports section is being tackled, or part of that is being tackled. Maybe we need to expand kind of their role in and around that. But I would highly recommend that we look at potentially a new person in the business development side, and Tasha's nodding in agreement with me, that would identify potential either existing events in other cities or emerging events that we can then go after to relocate here to Reno.
Yeah, one of the things I think is important to look at is the existing kind of bucket of money. I kind of view that as kind of that special event granting side. People are coming to us asking for money, people that are doing great events. But this new bucket is really, where do we want to go? And I'm looking at it more as a sponsorship almost. How do we want to go and sponsor something? Whether it's, the Interbike kind of scenario that we had a while back, or different things like that. And it's going to be a different set of criteria, because, some of the criteria is around the existing grant process is around marketing, but is that the same kind of criteria we would want? To me, it's really talking about room generation, room revenue generation, and how do we drive rooms, and how does it attach with the brand, and different things like that. And it may be more of, to me, it's kind of like writing checks. We're writing checks to get these things in. We're not, okay, show us how you did the marketing and what you did, and now we're going to pay that back. It's kind of a different feel, and I think those are some of the conversations that we have had. So. Yes, Jessica.
Yeah, and I think, Stephen, you said it right, and I think about some of our events, let's be honest, are aging, and I know that's the next agenda item, but I think, and I'm interested in Geralda's perspective too on the art side, but back in the day, it was the whole team, and I get what you're saying, Charles, about having a person dedicated to business development, but quite frankly, when the gamers and others get together, they'd go out and they'd go to these specific events, whether it was Safari Club, bowling, whatever it was, and bring them to Reno. And truly, I think we've got to go back to doing that, because we're a wonderful place, but that was a big push. When that happens, when everyone gets together, it happens. So that's how it truly happens here. And so I think on the other subject of the funding itself, the development, I was kind of looking for staff. I thought at this meeting we were going to hear this pot of money, like, for example, is the board giving recommendations that we focus on certain categories off-season, whether it's ongoing events, for example, getting rid of that criteria for this pot of money, events that already receive out of the first tranche, $500,000. Personally, I don't think they should be eligible for this pot. I think, so I just, are we gonna give bonus points to off-season events? Does staff have like some guidance recommendation for the committee that we can use for this pot of money? Because we're already starting to go into this fiscal year, and we heard from our public comment on the festival and event that you really do, in order to be successful, we gotta start marketing these things a year in advance. So I just think we gotta get on the ball and I'm looking for staff too to give us recommendations on the criteria of on this money. And Charles, if you guys have recommendations, that would be great of what we should be looking at today.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we are discussing today is what does this committee think those things should be, to then provide them to staff so that staff could then
Okay.
kind of take that and put it through the meat grinder, so to speak, and then bring those, that the written policy back and things like that. So certainly, I think staff has their thoughts, and we definitely want them to, let us know what those are during today's meeting and this process for sure.
Yes, thank you. I certainly, don't want to step on any toes for what this committee has in mind for something like this. Obviously, I'm very versed in what we currently do. In thinking through some of this, absolutely, I think some of the things we need to keep in mind as we're speaking about this, based on what we're doing with the other program, do we want it to be an annual event? Is that something we do want to consider? Because that's a big qualification for what we're currently doing. It ensures that they're coming back year after year. Is that something we want to consider? Operations and marketing. I think that's a big one as well that I think we should, and I was even thinking, and we can get to that in the next agenda item, the naming of this versus the naming of what we currently have. Perhaps we want to change our current program to specifically detail marketing, whereas this program may look at something more operational to help fund an event. Citywide, is this something we want to consider? Right now we currently have 2 Washoe County properties being included for our original program. Do we want to look at multiple properties? Do we want to look at something? What are the criteria for how big we want this to be? Room nights is one way, obviously, to measure, but especially for a first year here, it's simply an estimate. We wouldn't know. So what other ways do we want to think about that? And then, of course, as we talked about, seeking them out rather than having them submit an application. It doesn't feel quite right with the way we're talking about this new program. Applications, maybe if we need to know the basics, but at the end of the day, I think we need to do a lot of our own research. So those were my initial ideas on things that we should be discussing today, some things I think we can think about, but I do think there's a lot more to it than that.
Yes, Eric.
If I can, question first, just to be clear that in the current bucket of money, venues are not eligible to, so that is correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Venues themselves, if they're doing it on behalf of an event, that's different.
Understand. So I think just a few things I want to add in here is, the annual versus repetitive. I think we should be considering the venues and the ability of the events to attract additional annual. So one football team coming once could bring us the next football team, but there's not going to be a promise. We talked about that with concerts, with soccer matches. So I feel like the ability for the venue's reputation or the community's reputation around the venue to grow needs to be considered beyond just the event itself. I think the sales team working with the venues and understanding what our venue, truly understanding what our venue strengths are in the market. Again, focus group of 1 here. I think there are times that we work together, but I wouldn't say that we're always part of the consideration process unless we're raising our hand to be a part of it. So understanding what the strengths and opportunities are in the venues that we have currently. What Steven said struck me too is, Boise State itself is a conference game that we're going to get every other year, but what else can we put around some of our tentpole events that extend stays if heads and beds is what we're talking about here? So looking at how we make a 2-day event or a 2-night stay into a 4-night stay because, maybe there's something happening at the ballpark on the Friday night ahead of the Saturday football game, or in a different arena that makes it more citywide. And then I do think a minimum attendance, like if we're going big game hunting, I think we should look at minimum attendance thresholds for this bucket as a guidepost. Thank you.
Geralda?
Yes, hi. One of the things I've been thinking about with this and is also how to target underrepresented groups. And that's very important to me. And that's not something that, I find even in the arts that many of our underrepresented organizations, be them Latino, African American and such, they don't really know, or they're not being targeted per se. And I think it's important, especially with our growing demographics here, that we remember and consider and think about how to stop thinking in, a certain box and think about how to reach and go out and reach those underrepresented groups and organizations that are putting on events as well. And also, one of the things, in July, I attended the Cordillera Film Festival. Actually, I was in a film that was nominated and actually won. But I was thinking about that the whole time I went to that film festival. I said, oh my God, I live here in Reno and I didn't know about this. there were people from all around the world that attended. And, you know, there was one group from Iceland that was there. There were so many there were more people from outside the state that participated in that film festival. And I said to myself, where's the marketing on this? Where, you know, where is all of that? And I know that they're getting rooms, you know, because many of those people they were here and staying in Reno, and they were also in Sparks. So I think that there are missed opportunities out there, and that definitely is one. But I also think that there are missed opportunities with our underrepresented groups that we need to also focus on and think about how to get them in here as well with this as new startups.
Right. Charles?
I really appreciate the community comments, you know, kind of where we're headed. What I think the first thing that we need to do as part of this discussion, which is, again, recommended to the board for approval, this is just part of that process, right? But we have to define what the goal is. What is the goal of this additional 500,000? Because what we do in the initial monies that we do is that it's an extension of our marketing budget reaching people that we wouldn't normally reach to come here and stay. That's part of that original goal that we would otherwise use for marketing dollars to market and sell this destination. So reaching those folks and filling up room nights is part of that initial tranche of 500,000. I think we have to look at that saying, do we go down that same road? Do we tweak that? Is there something new that we're going to attack with those dollars? But I think overall, we've got to identify what the goals are of this group for this second part of money before we ever go down a road of who we're going to target, who's going to do that targeting, and such.
Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of to answer that, Andy and I had a pre-board meeting to kind of discuss this and threw out some of our thoughts. And really looking at this, I agree with Andy that I don't see this maybe necessarily as marketing and exactly what Charles said, what we're doing right now in the other tranche of money, that this is an opportunity more towards sponsorships of getting those events, you know, whether they're, you know, Hispanic art and culture, rodeo, I mean, things that whatever, it's sporting events, but sponsorship so that it wouldn't be just limited to marketing. But my question to Charles would be, if we decide that we want this to be more sponsorship, like Andy said, where you write a check, and there'd be criteria, they couldn't, you know, we just wouldn't give them a blank check and go for it and hope it's great. We would have criteria set up that would limit, you know, what they could do with it, what we expected. But I look at it as generating, number one, room nights, because the room nights then benefit us at the RSCVA. That's really what our bread and butter is the room nights, as well as the economic impact that they have when they come to the community. So the event is also, it's heads and beds, but it's more, you know, when you look at, you know, Golden Eagle out in Sparks is local but not. It generates $26 million a year in economic impact to this region of people who haven't even driven down Vista to see where it is because of all the tournaments, people coming in from out of town. So it is an economic impact. Is a priority for new things coming in, as well as those heads and beds. And if we looked at this as sponsorship, of writing a check that could be used for more than just marketing, could that money, I know right now it comes out of marketing, could that extra $500,000 be put in its own bucket? And I don't have Courtney here, and I'm not a finance person. Could it be put into a separate bucket that wasn't marketing, whether it's general fund, whether it's shifted to its own $500,000 for this specific, whatever we decide the criteria are and what we're going to call it, of sponsorships, of bringing things to the region that falls under sales and marketing, I would agree. Is that I mean, fiscally, do we need to do it that way? Does that make sense?
We can put this in its own bucket, so we can move that to do that. That's not a problem. But I would say that from a delivery point of view, sponsorship is marketing. So sponsorship is marketing and it's exposure for whatever goes through that. Now, whether we focus on economic impact versus room nights, I think that's something that's debatable. But at the end of the day, if we're going to go down the road of sponsorship, that is a form of marketing. So we've got to think about, again, those goals just to make sure that we clearly define what we're asking here.
But the difference, Charles, would be right now, Tasha, we we require, the money we're giving them is specifically for their marketing efforts to promote their event. We're not doing operational, we're not doing other costs that they might have. If we're going after, if we're big game hunting, looking for something bigger, just marketing might not be what they need to really make it happen. So it is marketing, but it would be more, so maybe a separate bucket might make sense.
I agree with the chairwoman on this. We discussed this last meeting too. That was a big, and I don't think it should be in marketing. I think we should call it sponsorship, because to me it is operational, and why would we string their hands that it has to be just truly for marketing if we want to get at other events here? And I think we should, I don't know if we're agendized today to do this, but I think we should give a motion on where we want to go. It's already October. If we want to get the criteria out to the community, what we're going to do, but I think we got to, I think we got to set it today. I think we can at least probably take a stab at it. I think we've heard from the committee, but also staff on what the criteria should be. Because then we got to take it to the whole board, so then by the time this process is over, it's going to be another fiscal year.
Well, I think the intent, if I'm not mistaken from our chair who set up this committee, was to get something in front of that board in November.
I hope so.
Oh, December, I'm sorry, December,
Okay.
which would be the next meeting.
Okay.
So we believe this committee's lifetime is relatively short but impactful. And to get that recommendation and the policy forward, and then to turn it over to the board for discussion, and then back to the internal subcommittee that will actually execute it.
That's what I was gonna ask, is there, because there is I think that internal subcommittee is gonna be critical. They're the ones that are gonna then take the charge.
Yes.
I feel that one of the main factors of the criteria needs to be a certain amount of fluidity and flexibility, right? That unlike your other 500, that's pretty regimented. And I don't even know if I'd go as far as to even call it I get what you're saying. I mean, it's almost not just business development, but you're buying business. You're going out and you're hunting it. And yes, it's sponsorship, but it might, I think we want to have the ability to have that fluid. It may not be maybe a one-timer. I think everything is considered. Let me put it that way. It should be put on the table, and we can vet it. I do think that crux of room tax obviously wants to be there, because that's what's replenishing this actual fund is the room tax. But if it were a high visibility enough and the rooms weren't quite there, that's something that I'd look at the subcommittee to kind of come back with a recommendation on.
Yeah, and I think the idea or the initial dollars are sitting and defined as a special event category. How we define that as people coming to us for grants versus us going after special events, I think is our ability. I think you have to be somewhat careful about how broad that becomes. Is it then a kind of a economic driver where, there's, business conferences that might be coming, and we're getting approached to do, a business conference that might not fit necessarily. So I think we just want to make sure it's not too broad, that it's like, hey, anybody come for this money, because I think the intent was special event, but what can be defined is, the how. We're not just, granting money out, and I look at it differently. Granting is the dollars going out in the existing program, sponsorship or economic development, whatever you want to call this. A couple things that, on the goals, a couple things that I thought that we should, think about as well is a need period. I mean, I don't think we need, another major event on 4th of July, right? I don't think we need another major event on New Year's Eve or Halloween, because, so let's define some need periods there. And then also I would look at brand alignment as well. What kind of events that we could bring into town here align with our brand that further, from an alignment helps us push that, whether that's, something that's happened with Patagonia or something that's happening again with the university and professional sports, those types of things. I think on a few of the items that Tasha brought up that, could be discussed, I think annual, I don't see this as being just that annual is a criteria for these dollars. That is sitting in a different element. I think operations, I don't think it's marketing. I think we're hearing that. And then again, I don't believe we are asking people, and to use our friends in the audience, I don't think that this pot of money, the Battle Axe, showed that it's great and there is a process for them to go through, but I think these dollars are something different than that. So I think those are some of the areas that I think we should be looking at as well. Yes, Tasha.
A few things I wanted to mention in thinking about our off-season, something we want to consider in addition to these big holidays. And I believe you all have at some point received our special event list through the year, as far as we know. We'd probably be looking at late October through May would be a good time period based on my knowledge of the special events we have. Of course, the properties have things going on all the time that may interfere with that. And another thing I wanted to mention to consider, we've talked about this with the current program, but I'm almost wondering if it's more relevant for this new one, is a time limit or a term limit. So as you're talking about, room nights are important. I did share with you that is the most difficult thing for me to obtain when we do get these applications. It's an estimate. It's impossible for the hotels to know. It's impossible for the events to know. So maybe economic impact, if that is something we'd like to consider, that's obviously a follow-up. As you mentioned, it wouldn't just be grant. This would be sponsorship or however we want to look at it. They would be supplying me or whomever with a post-event report of some sort. And that's what we currently do with our current program as well. But from there, maybe we can decide, okay, we gave you the money, here's what you did. Maybe it's a 3-year limit before we say, can we move you into the other bucket? Or are we done funding you? Or are you only here for 1 year? So if we want to consider events that can come year after year, we can certainly think about maybe a term limit as well.
Yeah, and I think another item that I believe we ought to be addressing is the regional awareness. This region is made up of sub-regions, and those needs are different. As a representative of the Tahoe portion of this jurisdiction, our special events needs are, incredibly different than the basin here and what's happening down in the valley. We can't do the huge, large events, yet there still is a need there. So, what does Sparks need? What does Reno need? What does, Tahoe? How do we develop something that's benefiting the region as a whole and not just individual portions of it? Charles?
Great comments by Tasha, which is really our needs period is really our October through March, when we talk about, booking rooms for our partner hotels. I will say that by Member Squaga's assertion, we need flexibility and fluidity. When it comes to, let's say, sports events, and specifically around college athletics, a lot of times those happen Thanksgiving, Christmas, when we have basketball tournaments. I was part of putting together the Disneyland Classic in Anaheim, where we had 4 teams, which turned into the Wooden Classic. Those are done around holidays. And so if we're going to say no holidays, we're going to limit ourselves around specific time periods where athletics is generating special events that's going to drive room nights. So I'd like us to stay away from holiday limitations, but really in October to March, October to May is certainly something that we should look at.
Sure.
Well, and on the holiday, having a husband who worked in gaming for 44 years, and even me with the airlines, after Thanksgiving, there's like a window until about December 19th or 20th that there are seats on airplanes, there are rooms at every property. You could probably tell me the same thing. Really dead period, early December. And so maybe, I don't know, some of those tournaments or possibilities, I don't know, working with the university when kind of the semester, looking around the semester, there's a real dead period between Thanksgiving and Christmas that is an opportunity for an event, and especially if it's tied to, and Patricia, I'm not sure, if you guys were looking at sports, would it be basketball? Would it be another sport? What kind of things? I know when I met with President Sandoval, we talked about, what are the, and those are things that, something like that, we wouldn't have this year. It's something you put in for, and it's out in the future. Yeah, you bid on it for the future, so, but that possibility that this could help that would be a commitment we could make and work through what that timeline looked like and what the funding, and if it's something that wouldn't come up for 2 years or 3 years, but we know that was something we were doing. So I don't know, what are your thoughts? And then the university's out for a month, right? So there's...
The university is out for winter. We have winter semester, so we're still offering classes, but the students on campus are greatly reduced in terms of their numbers, which does take tremendous pressure off of some of our facilities. One of the conversations we're having is that Lawler Event Center, which has been offline for a number of years and dedicated to athletics, with the new arrival of Stephanie Remp and President Sandoval, that is going to be put back into the mix in a way that it hasn't in previous years. So we're really excited about that. And when we talk about the opportunity for funds. I do realize that within the organization that would be bringing an event to town, you can move some of your money between buckets, but I'm thinking of some of the things that we would have to do if we're bidding on some of these nationally televised sporting events. We don't have the camera platforms that are necessary, and we wouldn't want to have them on a continuous basis because we don't need them. And so we would have to expend that kind of money in order to meet the needs of an event coming like that. So having that flexibility, if it's a capital improvement project into the venue, I think that's something different. But what we would be talking about for some of these events would be temporary changes to accommodate the event. And that's where this kind of funding, if it was allowed in the operational side, would give us greater flexibility.
Stephen?
Yeah, no, and I think these are great discussions. I think part of this whole process is really kind of, right, vetting it out, beat it up some. We're probably, I don't know if we're gonna walk out of here today with a hard, you know, this is exactly the roadmap. I think knowing that deadline is the December meeting, we want something to present to the fuller board. I mean, I think as we put this framework in, and again, this is just how I'm somewhat envisioning it and kind of see where this goes with the group, but to me, if we got the framework in place, that internal subcommittee though, I think at some point comes back with maybe your top 5 targets, right? And it might be an NCAA piece, it might be, you know, it might be the Dragonlight event, an equivalent to that. I don't know how that ultimately came to town or chose us, or we chose them, or if it even, you know, but some of this could be organic in that sense that it's a group out there looking to just extend. I believe the Dragonlight Festival is in other communities, right? Same organizer, same with the Van Gogh piece.
Van Gogh's going all over the country.
I mean, there, things out there of how do you look for that? You know, Eric, things you've programmed in your stadium, Nitro Circus, kind of totally different avenue, right? But how do we get that dialogue between the internal subcommittee and these ideas and kind of go, you know, in vetting it, this might be a longer shot, but because I think it's trying to put some sort of prioritization that we've got a shot at getting this group in for a one-timer, or this may be a repeat, but I see that again, I'm going back to that internal subcommittee at some point is gonna have to have something to paper to say, these are the 2 or 3 events that we really deem worthy of our money and our time. Again, I go back to that fluidity side. Some of this is each one has such a different aspect. I mean, if you're getting what do you call it, a friendly, you know, coming into town, that's a whole different animal, right, than a rotating art show or something like that, but.
Yeah. Eric?
Thank you. A couple points that I'm hearing too here is agree on flexibility, which unfortunately does then make it hard to narrow in when everything is too wide. But I think we do need flexibility in this. I think timelines is one of the things that's very challenging. Is the university might have to bid on something that's 2 years out. I might have to make a decision like by 5 on how much we can pay for something, and the promoter's gonna let me know, you know, by tomorrow morning whether we got it or not. So we run the gamut of timeline needs, and so the program that's existing in place misses both of those because it doesn't act fast in an emergency, but it also doesn't look multiple years out. So I think an ability to address timeline would be important, as well as, you know, the potential for, and understanding it's a public entity here, how quickly you could act, but being able to act quickly when an opportunity does strike. I want to maybe challenge just a little bit the downtime as the target. I don't know how the casinos and hotels look at it, but in our industry, I can do lots of things on a Tuesday in April. and people just aren't going to come to that game. It's not interesting, it's cold, they're not coming. So what do? Nothing. We leave it alone, it's dead. Our biggest success is figuring out which dates are gonna be the most interesting and then pile on as many things as possible to make that as big as possible with as much revenue. And I don't know exactly our percentages off the top of my head, but our top 12 games make a significant amount of the revenue to play it. We have to play 75 to get to those top 12. So I would say it may be an effort of diminishing returns if we focus solely on when we are at our low point, because there might be a reason we're at our low point.
I do think, I mean, the whole peak to peak, and I think it goes back to the flexibility, right? And again, I love our industry for as long, we always talk about trying to, make it, take the downtime, and lift it. And again, I think if we can do it, great, but I just wouldn't be married to it. I think there's some criteria when this group vets it, that looks at it and goes, you know what, that's a Thursday in February, it doesn't make sense for us to be doing it there. Or we may say, hey, it's such a great idea, it's worth doing it on a Thursday in February. But yeah, I'm with you on, I don't want to get just married to any. And going back to your point on the holiday, I think as long as we're in agreement that, hey, this is a big enough piece that it's okay. But I think it's a good point. I don't think we want to get totally tied down to that.
Well, I think some of that, your point about the Wooden Classic, I mean, I had the opportunity to go to the Maui Invitational at one point over Thanksgiving, and they play in these small, high school gyms, and, if you could do something like that and you spread it through the community, there's a game up in Incline, there's a game out in Spanish Springs, that would be a cool kind of concept to look at. It does, yeah. So we have a couple other items. I don't want to stop the conversation because I think it's all good, but I think what I'd like to do is maybe recap some of this, maybe turn it over to staff to kind of germinate a little bit, and then to, we're obviously going to have another meeting here before December to kind of bring back maybe some of this discussion around the policy, discussion around some of these goals, and your point being about what is the goal of this, I think is vitally important. But, we've talked about a need period. Again, the need period could, it could be peak to peak if those are the opportunities. We've talked about brand alignment, regional awareness, flexibility, I think is big. Dealing with the timeline, the short issue and the long issue on both of those sides where the current program doesn't really deal with. I think we are in agreement that it doesn't need to be annual, and I think we are in agreement it doesn't just need to be marketing. So I think those are good, and I do think it's that outreach, not the folks coming to us. Discussions about term limits, I think, is something that's interesting, and again, these could all be one-offs for that matter, because we just don't know what kind of business that's going to be. I do like the minimum attendance goals, but I think those are going to be different. And the minimum attendance goal in Incline looks vastly different than one down here in Reno. So I think we have to think about some of those. So those are ones that I captured. I'm sure there's some on the committee that I might have missed. So if there's anything else, and then maybe we could direct staff to kind of look at that, bring back some of that, and then from there, I think we will have an opportunity to drill down to much more of a policy that is more specific that we could recommend to the board. And the other thing I just wanted to note, Ben did bring this forward. I guess this was back, I don't know exactly when this was, a number of years back, but it was an unsolicited policy proposal and guidelines that the board weighed in on. I think they did act on this, or they, maybe it was just a discussion. But
I think it was a discussion.
But
It'd be a good framework.
yeah, it's a good framework that's kind of started here, and we can ask Ben to share that with the committee. But it may be something that is a place to start with some of these things, and we could build in some of these elements that we talked about, if that makes sense. Madam Chair, you have a question?
I think too, priority, and you talked about it, Andy, really I'm looking at the same way that we are not, we're going out, so the sponsorship, we're going out to find these events. I think is it in a need period? Maybe that weighs differently But I think I appreciate, Eric, what you're saying too on building, on times when people are here. And when you think of it in this region, I mean, way back, probably when my husband first started 44 years ago, casino industry, or maybe before that, look at what we've done in the region to extend Labor Day. So what did we come up with through the years? So, and Patricia, you're smiling because you were here doing special events back then. So we added, you've got balloon races, and you've got camel races, and then you've got the air races, and then you've got street vibrations that we kept pushing out beyond Labor Day, which probably even longer, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, Labor Day was kind of it, and extending that season. So we've already done it as a region, and it's been super successful. So really kind of keeping that in mind too, that I don't think it has to be in the off-season. It might extend something. I like extending, extending or creating something around an event that's coming here already as possibilities. But I think I like that a lot. And in looking at all of the next agenda item, I was kind of marking things that we could take from here that would be important. And Andy, you've mentioned a bunch of them already. No on the annual attendance. Would we have to have 2 hotels or not? Maybe that's something that's flexible too. That's in the first bucket, but maybe we don't need that in the second. Maybe it's 3 or 4. Maybe it's 1. And spreading around the community is another opportunity. I love, and you guys have done that with volleyball in the past. The volleyball tournament, that huge festival that came here, would use other facilities besides the convention center. So those opportunities, and the university, because President Sandoval did talk about Lawler, and he talked about their facilities that in partnership with the university, what can we do? And it might not just be sports. I mean, Lawler, the Joe, in partnership, not just for our salespeople, but an event that would encompass something that tied university and what we're doing together too, I think are great possibilities.
Great.
Thank you. I agree with all of your points in your list. The one I may just add would just be on making sure that we understand all the venues that are available in the and what they are able to do. To Councilwoman Bybee's point, sports venues don't just do sports, and vice versa. And one of the coolest events we held was the Reno Phil outdoor concert last summer. That was all James Bond themed, and you wouldn't have expected that to be in a ballpark. So I'm sure Lawler and Mackey also can do lots of things besides sports. So just understanding the venues, and to piggyback on the Maui Invitational, that goes all the way to every gym in the community that could potentially play into something larger. Thank you.
Your mic.
I think our existing events should be able to tap into this fund. I think that should be important, and the
Don't
fact,
think they should or should, sorry, I missed that.
I do not think they should be eligible for this fund. I think this is new, and I also, going back to Councilwoman Bybee's point, that I just think this has got to be a separate fund, whatever we name it, economic, special events fund, whatever, because I understand the marketing component, but we may want to use marketing dollars too to support it. And the timeline, I think that could come back to the board, whatever, in 2024, we've got X, and we know about it, so maybe we're setting aside a little to carry over. And then I guess I disagree slightly on the off-season. I think we got to do both. And again, Councilman Bybee, you're right. The balloon races and street vibe, it gets to be a bit of a ghost town around here for those different events. And I think we have opportunities with the arts community, things that are indoors, but also, I guess, the side question, convention. I know we said, I think, Andy, you had brought up, this isn't just for, but if it's a convention in December, we've had those before here that filled a lot of room nights that were one-offs. So if that comes up too, it comes down to flexibility. If that comes up too, I'd like our staff to pursue that too, because room nights is it's still the most important. So, I think those indoor events during the winter months, I still think we're missing the mark on the arts component when we have Burning Man here, we have a generator going on in Sparta. We have some major arts and tourism here in the biggest little city that we haven't even tapped into, that people, like I mentioned last meeting, Art Basel, we should be going out to that in December. They're looking at Reno potentially for a destination. Let's bring it. I mean, those off-season months, I think we have opportunity there too. Eric, totally agree with you on the venue. We've been stuck, and I understand we have public buildings that are funded. And Charles, a hard thing for Charles is, yeah, we need people in the convention center and our other publicly owned facilities. But it goes back to, if the venue's full, regardless of where it is, that's raising ADR, that's bringing in heads and beds, which goes to pay the debt service on these very buildings. So, amen on the venue portion too. I think we've been very short-sighted on that. The Emerge event, and this was before Charles's time, your predecessor, quite frankly, I met with, I can't remember who created Life is Beautiful. The guy's a genius, and he came and he met with a lot of community partners and was kind of shunned, quite frankly. And I think, Charles, you can change that for that particular event, because I think that's another one where I think we have tremendous opportunity, and I think you can, I mean, he does those all over the country, and he needed some, it was I can't remember, big seed money, like 200, 250, but he has a huge following, and Life is Beautiful start off like this, and it grows. So I'm glad you brought up that event, because Charles, that may be a contact that we can just go out and resurrect. And I don't know, Geralda, he met with you, but.
Yeah, and I would just love to add on, if I may, because the Reno Arts and Culture Commission, you know, we saw an opportunity and discussed for months about having a Winter Light Festival, and thought that that would be a great idea to have during this dark period, you know, after Christmas. You know, what can we do? Let's have like a great arts lights festival like they do in Europe, and Montreal has a big one. When I was in Burning Man this past month, I was on the radio, BMIR, with the executive arts director for the Portland Light Festival. And he was like, I'd love to come down to Reno and help you guys start. He says, we get, over like 400,000 people at ours or something like that. I was like, oh my gosh. So I think we have opportunities. The Arts Commission, what we saw was we didn't have enough money to do it and do it well. We didn't have the money to bring the art, the light art from around at these different places to Reno to do it and have this successful event. So we tabled it. But that's something during the dark months that we could do, and and get folks here and have their, the rooms, and bring in the tourists during a dark month and have a great winter light festival. I see that as an opportunity, something that, we couldn't afford, but we really wanted to do. So there are opportunities like that out there as well.
Great.
Yeah,
sure.
One more quick comment as I'm making my notes here. A couple of thoughts is that we do want to, as we're looking at, when we get, we set up this policy and the framework of what we're going to do. As we're looking at events, we also want to make sure that the venues, but that the hotels are available. We're obviously not going to try to book something New Year's Eve, or maybe even during Ribs or Hot August nights, where the room nights would not be available because they're already filled. So kind of working around room nights as well as venues, I think, is critically important to make sure we have availability of both. And then I guess on the funds, Charles, would these funds, and this might be a Courtney question too, if we don't expend the whole funds, and because we're coming in this mid-year, so for this fiscal year, we're coming in, if we do this, the board decides something in December and we get it rolling, how would the funds, would they roll into the following year? Can they roll in? I know, Tasha, sometimes, because you guys switch from calendar year to fiscal year, so it was an accounting nightmare that I would give to my son, but I wouldn't even try to dig into. But kind of, is it something that we have 500 for right now, and whatever we spend, the rest goes into the general fund, and we decide if we allocate 500 again next year? And can we schedule things if we find things, some new event that comes in after July 1st, if it's booked, I guess the financial side of it, how do we work that?
So my understanding is, it's much like we do at the airport, when we put the $1 million aside for MRGs, that it has to be spent in that year. It does not roll over. It does go to the ending fund balance where we see it, but it will not roll over. So we have to reallocate that year after year.
Which would be a board decision.
I was gonna say, so the board could decide to roll it
Absolutely.
over
Yes.
in addition to the,
Yes.
right? Or we may
We
decide
spent
we're not gonna
200
do
or
it anymore.
300,000 of it,
Right.
there's 200 left, we could have a discussion, we want next year's budget to be 700.
Right. The one last comment, just since I have my mic turned on, but and I'm sure you have these discussions with your staff anyhow, but as you pointed out, you have 3 people doing the sports deal. You have Mike and his team on the sales. Because I agree, I think, it could be a convention out there that we're not seeing that's a piece of business that falls in perfect. I'm assuming they all know opportunities that, if there's an opportunity out there that we just couldn't do because there was a site fee, or there was, there was money that was not available. I mean, I would think that, right, this is the kind of the green light to go, let's get on the phone with them and see if we can salvage something.
Yeah, and when it comes to conventions, it really falls in our different bucket. Mike has on the sales side dollars that goes towards that. If there was an opportunity that came up that we couldn't refuse, you'd see me coming to the board saying, we need a meeting to allocate to come down that road. But I look at that as a very separate entity, conventions versus special events that we're looking at here.
All right, so I think this is an action item, but I believe we've given direction from a staff perspective, and if you guys are comfortable with that, I think we could close this item and move on if everyone's good with that. All right. We are going to move on to item F, the discussion and possible action to recommend changes to the current process criteria for the special event funding program. The RSCVA Special Events Committee will discuss the current special events funding program and possibly take action to provide direction to staff and/or recommend changes to the current process and our criteria to the RSCVA Board of Directors. So we've kind of teed off some of that in this earlier conversation. And Charlene, I know you've got some thoughts on that as well, potentially. Not to pick on you, but I'll welcome you to-
Only a couple that came up this last year during our board meetings. A big one was the Washoe County affiliation of whether, we're limited to generate room nights in the county. If it occurs outside, does it generate enough room nights? And I know this last year, the Reno Tahoe Open, or whatever you call it now, I know that's Barracuda. Sorry, I'm like way behind. That was a few years ago. Obviously, I don't golf. So the Barracuda was an example. It was held in Truckee. So you had room nights that were up at the lake and not at Andy's end of the lake. So I don't know if that's, is that something that still is, I guess I question, is that, do we need to keep that or not? The room night generation here in Washoe County is important, and the visibility of the exposure for the region. And I know some of the marketing, I think Christine and her team were up there to do marketing for our region. So is it something that you, from your committee perspective, look at, is it kind of handcuffing you, and we didn't really realize it that much till Barracuda moved?
No, thank you for bringing that up. I think when we looked at Barracuda, obviously this was an event that was so impactful. We felt it had such a presence. I mean, really the reach that they had was ultimately why we were so involved with them. What we decided to do, and I do believe it was mentioned in the last meeting, as you said, Christina and the team were up there. We actually used it as a marketing opportunity. So Barracuda truly was the only event that I had seen in recent times that qualified under the held outside of Washoe County, but bringing room nights here. So when we said, well, if we took that away, how could we still work with them? So we did a separate fund with them outside of this program to do a marketing influencer sponsorship. And that actually worked really well for both sides because they didn't have to go through the process. We could identify exactly what it was we were looking for from them, and then they were able to highlight the destination even more than they would have been during this program. So to answer your question, no, I don't think it does handcuff us. That was really the one event, and I think we were able to find a really great solution for that.
If we're going to go down this road, I'm going to bring up 4 different issues that I think that might help our discussion here, that I think that we have to look at. One is the one that Chair Bybee said, in county versus out county, right? Is that something that we want to adjust or not? And I personally have some opinions around that. The second item I would ask you to consider is there a term limit? Should we be funding events for an X amount of period of time before we roll off and look for new events to grow, whether it's legacy or non-legacy? So that's the second thing. The third thing is the percentage of funding that are required in any given year that we do. Right now, we cannot fund more than 25% of the annual fund for any events. Maybe we keep that, maybe we change that. But again, that's something else for us to consider. And the fourth thing is, do we want to change, or can we, not do we, but can we change in terms of accountability for room nights? Again, Tasha said it earlier, we cannot accurately measure the amount of room nights, so any group can say, I bring in X amount. And I'll use Battle Axe. You guys had a great event this year, and they said they had 200 room nights. Well, it's really hard for us to be able to verify that. And so those are 4 items within the current qualifications that maybe might be open for discussion, or you might have others as well that you might want to bring up.
Because I just had the thought on the room night calculation, because we had totally separate, back on my days on the council, there was the issue of the mall and the sales tax and how you could quantify. And so back then, and I thought this was a good idea, they said the overall sales tax rate had to raise by this percentage in Washoe County during, and that was specific to a time. Is that something that would help staff, for example, if we said, hey, your event is during this week, let's really see if the rooms were generated, if the rooms raised during the week you said you had the event. And so that way staff's not, because I agree with you, we're putting, and that is our mission, and we're putting staff in a weird position to try and quantify that. And we're giving the burden to the event, but obviously, of course, they're gonna say, we generated these room nights, so.
I'll defer to Tasha first, and then I'll add something in when she's done.
Yes, and that, what we've had events actually come and ask for that specifically, and there's so many variables there. I hear what you're saying. One thing I do want to say is when events apply and during their post-event reports, they are required to explain how they got to that number, right? So there's little mathematical equations, especially for ticketed events, that we can look at and say, X amount of people came to our event. We can estimate based on ticket sales and zip codes and where they bought from, how many are out of market. From that, we can determine how many of those likely stayed somewhere, 2 people, 1 room, that kind of a thing. So there's a very flexible equation that we do look at with that. So that's all I was gonna say. But and my understanding, and Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, I wanna say when we started looking down to specific weeks, our room tax collection was only able to look monthly. And I could be wrong, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but that might have been part of the problem too.
Well, the one thing I was going to bring up that is a concern for me is overlap. For example, Art Town's a whole month. Right. And so you have things going on all month, and then you have multiple events on top of that. So you can't really break that. It can probably give you like directionally a little bit, but you can't really get down to what you need. And one of the things that I've wanted to do, and I really think it's still something we need to do, is to almost shift and look at economic impact. When we look at different tiers, we want to make sure that we're having that economic impact. And excuse me. And I certainly think for our legacy events, we need to help fund a study on the legacy events to look at that economic impact, as well as emerging events. So again, this is open for discussion. I think it's really hard to get down. It's a great thought, but because of that overlap, it makes it tough for us to be able to pinpoint.
Yeah, I think on this agenda item, I'd really do defer to Charles and your team, Tasha, to kind of say, you know, again, from last presentation, I kind of took it that, hey, this actually seems to be working pretty well. It's not perfect. I think that room night challenge has always been there, and something like Battle Axe, I think, where you have a room block with, let's say, the row, it's much cleaner. You can say, this is what we drove. Still doesn't mean
Yeah.
people didn't book outside of that.
Right.
You almost have to give them a certain
Right.
10%, right, kind of add-on. And I think there's a handful of, every event's so different that way. But I really defer to you and your staff, Charles, on, it seems like this is, I don't know if there's tweaks. I didn't quite get the 25% dilemma.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have into the qualifications is that we cannot fund more than 25% of the overall budget for any event. So basically, they're not reliant on us specifically to make that event go. And that's something that is very important, and it's there. And to your point about out of the room block, for those that are not part of this day today, when you have conventions, you have up to 40 to 45% of people booking out of a room block in any city. So when they make the room blocks with those particular hotels, people are going to Airbnbs, or they're going to their loyalty programs where they're staying. So it's really hard, and really it's directional.
Charles, what are your thoughts on the county? Because I personally think it should be Washoe County. I think by statute, we're Washoe County, curious our legal interpretation, but want to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, and I do have thoughts. First of all, I think the Barracuda Championship is amazing. I think it's a great event. I would like that event to be back in Reno, and really, really specifically in and around because of the TV exposure and the publicity that it generates. And I'm sorry that they were, that they hold that event outside. I think that we do still get some room nights from that, but I think specifically we need to keep that in the county as part of the requirements, because it's promoting room nights and publicity and marketing within the county lines that affects all three entities, the Lake, Sparks, and Reno.
And then just the other thing I'll say, the only thing I disagree with you on, Stephen, is some of our legacy events have not gotten innovative. I know that's not popular to say. I'm sure I'm gonna get calls later, but they're not appealing, I'm just gonna be frank, to a younger generation. Let's face it, Hot August Nights, the air races. We have these other events that are not catering to a younger demographic, and their attendance is starting to go like this. And I think we gotta look at that. I think we've gotta look at there are events that have done a good job with it, the rodeo being one of them. They've done a very, very good job keeping that attraction for all age demographics. They've been innovative, but I think some of these events that we have here have missed the boat that way. And so we keep funding them, we give them a large portion of that events funding, and the problem with that is, does that limit other events from coming in and growing? The new generation of events. And Andy, you hit the nail right on the head. The sustainability, we should go back to, what was it, Line Bike. That brought in a ton of people, or that bike. The different, with our marketing region, that's a huge group of, and that also, that bike, I can't remember the other one that was here, but I looked at how it appealed to a diverse audience. And I think that that's probably my biggest heartburn with our current policy, is that we're continuing to fund the same events. It's going down, their attendance is going down, and Geralda, you're right too. We're taking that money and we're using it all up, and there's probably other events that we could help seed. I'm very curious how the haunted house is going at the bowling stadium. Is that room to grow into a festival, for example? And can we help them seed it? And that came in kind of last minute, but I'm hearing, I haven't been yet, but I'm hearing it's off the hook cool. And so how do we save some money for that too? Because that is different than I see the battle axe and tracks coming to that pot of money more so than the pot of money we were just discussing, which is more going on the road. So I just don't want to, I want these new events to be successful too, and we only have so much money, and it's getting eaten up if you look at I'm curious what the air race attendance was over the last 4 years. I would like staff to show us I mean, that's a ticketed event. We can tell some of the matrix on some of these events, and I think, listen, they may not be politically popular, but I think we've got to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I just, a couple thoughts, on the limits thing, I think we do have to figure out, because there has been the same horses at the trough, so to speak. So I think we got to figure that out. And the other thing that I think we got to discuss is, and I'll use this as an example, we have a very small granting program up in Incline. A $15,000 contribution, which is a big part of that budget, going to Shakespeare is what part of their overall budget. But that $15,000 to a smaller operator that's starting something new, that's a much bigger impact. So how are we justifying the dollar amount, and are some of these really just, kind of bumping the bottom line, so to speak, and raising that bottom line of the event, which the events need to make money or they're not going to go on, so I totally support that. But how best can we use that? So if we can create a term limitation on this, and if we can look at the level of funding influence as it has on, the small, medium, and large, the three categories, legacy, established, and emerging, the bulk of those dollars are spent on that legacy side, and they are the largest budget size. And so, can those dollars be better utilized to get some of these other smaller ones going? Charles?
So I'm going to make a comment in and around the legacy events. I don't want to call out any one, because I think they're all important. I think they're all important for the history of what's happened in our community. That being said, if we're going to continue to grow, I think we have to continue to innovate and find things like Battle Axe and take a chance and a flyer on new events. That being said, to member Asquaga who basically said it's working, and I do believe it's working real well, and I tip my cap to Tasha, who does a lot of work, and goes through a lot of tedious work to make sure that it runs correctly. I would recommend that we don't really change a whole lot with it. However, one of the things that I think I would encourage this group to allow our committee to go back and do is to tweak and make a suggestion and to put a cap on how much we give to legacy or any event after X amount of years. Not to say that we're going to stop funding it, but in order to encourage, because here's the deal, folks. We're not going to always set records for room tax collection, and we might not always have this dollars. And so we have to continue to pivot and reinvent ourselves. And so my suggestion is, without putting a hard dollar on it, that we create a runway that we fund either regular events or legacy events for X amount of years, and then we put a dollar cap on the amount after that, the maximum that can be done, to put money back into to fund younger events that come through. And I think if you rely on us, and I hope you do, kick it back to us and develop that parameter to come back to this group and say, this is our suggestion. And that creates a path for us.
Charles, I do agree. Like, I still want to fund all those events. Don't misunderstand. Hot August nights, air races, all those events. I'm just saying I don't want it to be the sole. It eats up so many marketing or so much of that pot that I just feel like we need to give some of these new events their opportunity.
Tasha?
Yes, and I wholeheartedly agree with the implementing something new or reestablishing themselves. And I do want to note from the back end of things, and I have tried to communicate this with events, especially our legacy events, when they're coming in year after year, and you can see in the history here, some of these events are getting less and less money every year too. It's in small increments, but, and I will just say names, Street Vibrations, even air races, a little bit less. I want to see something new, and that's something we definitely take into consideration and take to heart in the panel, is if it is the same ask year after year, we need to really consider how this funding is helping. The balloon race is a good example of they may have, for the most part, the same event. They are always trying to add something new. They can only do so much, but a lot of our dollars go towards the marketing of new special shapes that have never been there before. So they have that ability to say, Darth Vader is coming for the first time, or Yoda's coming, and so we're supporting that because we know that will bring people because they've never been here before. So we are trying to think of that on the back end, and I appreciate that. And this conversation about legacy events versus emerging and established has been going on for so long. I love to hear your thoughts on it because it is a sensitive subject, but I agree. I think we need to see more to keep supporting at that level.
So I want to, Patricia or Geralda or Eric, any thoughts on that, on this particular item? I know relatively maybe new to this conversation, but you're probably familiar.
I actually had one question based on Tasha talking about the reporting part of it. Is there not a formula that all of these events they have to use as far as measuring their rooms versus? Do you have a formula that they have to use in reporting that?
It's a very loose formula, much like I just said. I do have that in writing under the application explanation portion of our application is so extensive. So we have a separate document to explain how to answer some of these questions. So my example of a formula is in there, but I'm always open to different ways because some events do really get a lot of information from their room blocks. Some people love to book within room blocks for a specific event, but it's true, most of them cannot rely on that information. So
Right.
It is out there. Whether they choose to use it is a different story.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if there should be some type of uniform measurement so that, you are getting the same information from all of these groups, and so that you're measuring accurately and fairly, equitably. So I guess I do wonder about that, the way the reporting is happening. So that's one thing that I was thinking about there. And other than that, I'm agreeing, especially with Jessica, as far as the legacy groups go. And that's a conversation that I know we've even had, at the city level, at the arts, is like how much, how long should we be funding legacy organizations and how much of the pot should we be giving, this is a conversation I think that's going around.
Universal.
It is. Yeah, it really, really is.
Decade.
And I know we keep thinking the same thing. There has to be a cap. There has to be term limits as to how long that, you continue to give an organization that looks the same, that's not doing anything different or innovative, that's not going out, reaching new audiences, underserved, and these are the questions. That's why I always ask those questions. What are you doing differently? How are you reaching new audiences? Who are you bringing in? Who is your audience? How are you measuring that? Is it, and those are the questions that I think are important, to ask, especially our legacy organizations that are like looking pretty boring out there.
Eric.
Thank you. As I did print this out and review I appreciate this getting put together and seeing what's been funded. What I would say, I guess I would be careful. I feel like be a little bit careful on how much we attack legacy events because they could go.
Right.
And so, sometimes it's easiest to go after the biggest. And, I've been part of a community that lost their baseball team because kind of no one thought they'd do it. Not saying that has anything to do with Reno, but so as I look at emerging, established, and legacy, I appreciate the changes to the legacy to keep them, being newer, but recognizing how important they are. To me, like I zero in on the established sort of for my, I don't want criticism, or I'd like to challenge of like where's the established going? Are they moving toward becoming legacy, or are they just cashing the check, doing the same thing and moving on? And then like all the emerging, I think that's fantastic because we don't know which one of those emerging is going to turn into a legacy in 10 years. So I feel like giving more opportunity to the emerging and putting a little more emphasis on challenging the long-term established would be my only thought process to consider here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Andy, can I just add, I do, and I agree with, really, I think it's been a great discussion. You know, the failure rate of events is off the chart. I mean, it's probably, I don't know, 8 out of 10 ultimately don't push beyond a certain point. I do think we have to be mindful of the, like, and I think your point, Charles, of, you know, is it a cap that they go into? I don't disagree with any of that, so we can redeploy. You know, we use the term economic development. I think on some of those legacy events, we'd be amazed at what they generate for the area. I mean, for sure. I won't even get, you know, between Hot August nights and not just, yes, you know, it's funny because I would love to see new audience coming in, but as long as they're booking it too, there's a certain side going, if it's working, you know, I think you have to have those honest discussions with them, like, what are you doing new and what, but there's some events that, I mean, balloon race is a great example. You can do some new things within itself, but honestly, it is what it is, and that's what people want to come and see. And as long as they're driving it, I think that's fine. But I like the idea of maybe there's a cap limit on that legacy that they don't, you know, at a certain point, that's what you got. They have time to budget around it, make up for it on other sponsorships, and I think that's a good recommendation.
Yes.
I agree, some really, really awesome comments, you know, really with everybody. The input is really exciting to kind of see, you know, we're all on the same path and kind of bringing a little bit different from each one of us. The legacy events, you know, honestly, in the big two, you know, air races and Hot August nights, the reality of the demographics are my age group and older. And so the reality of how do they, and we don't run the event, but as we're looking at if we're going to fund, encouraging, and a lot of that has to do with who's in charge, you know, who's running those organizations that has a new vision, that is more creative, says, okay, you know, we've got all these amazing cars. How do we, you know, how do we appeal to a bigger cross-section of families, of the other communities that are don't even know or, you know, aren't coming out to see the cars and be a part of it. So it is kind of reinventing themselves a little bit, but yet the culture and the tradition and the history is important, especially any of us who've been here a really long time. You know, I remember taking my kids out dressed up like we were in the 50s and watching the cars cruise down Virginia Street. It became a family thing for us. So I understand with air races, and those are the top two, that really the demographics of who does that is an older generation, but how do they do outreach to include bringing kids out to the air races, bringing schools out, bringing out a new audience, and obviously that's a responsibility, not ours. But I think the cap, maybe the limit after so many years with all of our events, and with the new ones, kind of knowing that we'll start you off, we'll get you started, and then as you get your legs, get your feet under you, and you're doing well, like their event, it's something that they might not need our funding at all, because it winds up turning into a bigger event that can stand on its own, and the minimal funding that helped when we started it, so we can turn around and find another event and find another new event out of this bucket, where the other bucket we're looking to bring in, one of the big ones. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Great, and I think as we're all agreeing that the program that's currently in place is a very strong one, and I think we're talking about tweaks on the edges to some extent. And I agree, sending this back to staff, I think you guys are best to hear what has been talked about, how you've already worked with the program, and bring that back. So unless there's any final comments.
Just one quick one, Mr. Chair, and I do want to say, because I don't want some headline that we're not going to fund legacy events. So I want to clarify for anyone watching that I am in favor of funding legacy events, this organization, and Eric, you're absolutely right. I remember when Hot August nights, there was the discussion of them going to Long Beach, and I think Charlene, Stephen, but I do think it's important for them to innovate. And I think that's got to be part of what we look at. But certainly they are important to the economic. I remember that discussion of Long Beach and how important they are for the community region and all of those things. But I do think there's an opportunity for some tweaks there on appealing to, a larger demographic.
Great. All right. Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to close item F. I am going to take item G, the brainstorming session, since we have been stylized till 4 o'clock, and it is 4:05, and we're going to move that to the next meeting. And with that, I'm going to go to item H, committee member announcements, reports, and updates. Is there any committee member announcement or update, other than the football game that starts sometime very soon? So bring your black. All right, hearing none, we're going to go back to public comments from the floor. Lisa, any public comments?
None at this time, thank you.
Great, thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks for the great discussion, everyone. Yeah, we did.